And finally, our last mini case study before we get into some tips for you is the idea of multiple means of action and expression. And this is probably the principle we see most enacted at William & Mary right now, especially with the CALL curriculum. A lot of faculty are thinking about alternate ways of demonstrating mastery. Like Jonathan said on the video, it's easy to set goals for your students. It's a little harder to think about various ways the students might take to get to that goal and how they demonstrate mastery. So different types of assessment is what we're talking about, projects that look different. Nothing wrong with a traditional research paper or term paper, but there are a lot of other options now, and we have the technologies to help you make that accessible. So provide options for physical action, for example, or expression and communication, or what we call executive functions. Those are options for students to play on their own strengths, to give them agency to decide. This next one is a little long, but we are going to show about the first 4 minutes, and you're going to be so interested that you just can't wait to see the rest of it, I promise. So we'll send this out to you as part of our instructional materials set that we send after the workshop, and you can watch the rest of Tyler's case. But his case involves a new type of assessment he used in his chemistry course known as Infographics. If you don't know what an infographic is, it's kind of like a digital story told mostly with pictures, but also has some words and some images there that help you understand a concept. So, Tyler, take it away.
This is Chem 341, Physical Chemistry for the Life Sciences. It's the terminal class for students who are getting, one of the terminal classes for students who are getting a chemistry minor. It's a smallish class, 15, 20 students. This past semester I had 15. A lot of discussion, use a lot of literature, talk about techniques, so really kind of a capstone overview of their whole chemistry education. So with that in mind, I was thinking about alternatives to the traditional final exam, and I wanted to do something where they were going to synthesize all of the stuff they'd learned, and I came up with this idea of doing an infographic. Pick a topic that they want to distill down, make it accessible, make it visual, make it engaging. I wanted to leave it open to them, partly because I thought that would stimulate creativity, but also because I wasn't quite sure what I was expecting out of the assignment. So there are a lot of iterations of how do we approach design, how do we approach interpreting infographics, how do we approach designing them, what's appropriate for an infographic, what's not. And in the end, they produce these, some interactive, some static representations of concepts that we discussed in class. Well, first of all, I was thinking we could have a gallery, sort of a place where we could all gather and look at each other's infographics, and they would look appealing, they would be engaging. We'd say, oh, you talked about entropy in such a pictorial, beautiful way, as opposed to just a bunch of equations, which I'd been writing out during the semester. So that's just one example of, I liked the aesthetic idea of it. I've also been thinking about, what will students take away from this class? And a lot of students have said they've liked this class that I've taught before, but after some time, weeks, months, maybe even hours, they've lost a significant amount of the course material. And so designing something that they have ownership in, that they've invested time into one narrow project, I thought would at least give them something that they can hold on to. Even if they don't remember all the details of thermodynamics, they might still have some idea of what's a path function. When I was designing the syllabus, I knew we were going to have to take some time to look at other infographics and get a sense of what's out there, what do we like, what don't we like. And Adam said, here's something you could consider: collectively design your rubric for grading. And when he explained it to me, I thought, this is exactly what I want to do. I can retain some control over, I'm going to be very, not in charge. I'm going to look at the content rigorously, and that's going to be half of the infographic. But then let's decide together where the other half of the points are going to come from. And I think the class decided it was going to have an aspect of how images are used, how text was used, how the overall layout was designed, and then they included a part for creativity. And one of the things I really liked about that is I felt like the pressure was taken off of me to be, in terms of grading in this visual realm where that's not my expertise. I'm good at grading exams with questions with fixed answers, but I didn't want it to become oh, I liked this one more than this one, so you get the A and you get the B. And so having that rubric that we decided on collectively midway through the semester, everyone had access to it throughout the entire production and process of their infographics. I think it made me feel a lot better, and I think the students had a clearer idea of their expectations. I wanted it to be open this past go around. I'm not sure I'd be as open if I did it in the future, But this past time, I said, I want it to be a visual depiction of what you're trying to convey, and you can choose your format. So I suggested they could make a traditional static image infographic, which many students did. Either they used online templates or they built it up in PowerPoint or something. Some students wanted to make something a little more interactive, so using Microsoft Sway or even little mini PowerPoint presentations that were just a few slides, you know, image A, image B, string it together with some text and give a little bit of flow. A couple of students opted to do more complex presentations, so I gave them the option to choose what medium and how interactive or how guided of a project it would be. So I had one student that made a very technical infographic describing prion proteins and how the misfolded protein is the thermodynamically stable product and the biologically active protein is the kinetically favored product, and contrasting the difference between the thermodynamics and the kinetics in that sense and why it has some consequences biologically. That was a very rigorous scientific infographic. It wasn't as beautiful, but it conveyed a lot of information. I had another student who did an overview of electron microscopy, which won the Nobel Prize that I guess last fall. And they were just walking through the basic steps of, this is the machine you would buy, this is how you would freeze your samples, this is how you, in a very hand-wavy, no equations sense, this is how you would reconstruct the images. And then I had some students, one student in particular did an infographic about, it was a Sway presentation about why popcorn pops, talking about the pressure building up and how it expands. So they all targeted different audiences, and I asked the students to specify what was the audience they were intending to send the infographic to. And I think they all, for the most part, did a pretty good job targeting those audiences. When we turn it into the final assignment, I said, part of your infographic, you're going to turn in a separate one-page explanation that includes who your audience is, but then you'll be graded on, do you match your infographic to the audience you said you're targeting? I felt like I was engaging with the students' comprehension of the material in a different way than when I do regular exams. Having them produce something, I felt like I understood the students' interest, level of understanding, ability to communicate differently. And that was at least interesting, and I think also helpful when it came down to assigning final grades. I liked the grading of it. It was a much more pleasurable experience than grading a stack of final exams at the end of the semester. And I think partly because it was this engaging with the students as well. There are certainly classes for which I would think this is a totally inappropriate assignment. But for this particular class, I feel like it's a nice way to encapsulate a lot of what they've learned through a lot of chemistry classes and put it all.
Enjoyed that process, his students enjoyed that process, and hopefully you picked up on a couple of things about the multiple pathways to action expression. The infographic, while it was a main project, it was not the only assessment. They still had quizzes and tests and I think a paper, but the bits and pieces they had to do throughout the semester were building towards this infographic. So if we were to lay this out on your blue column here, so examples would be optimize access to tools. Not everyone used Canva or Easily or other infographic tools. Some of them used PowerPoint or Sway. And so the platform allow for some access, and whatever was physically made more sense to the students they could use. There was multiple levels of support and performance, so they didn't just say, go out and create an infographic, have fun, see you in 15 weeks. There's bits and pieces, we call scaffolds, stepping stones on the way to that final project, and they had feedback on each one. All right, so making the rubric was actually one of those steps, but so was breaking apart the different pieces of an infographic. And I think he even had a very well-known science writer, a journalist, Skype into the class and share, or no, I think he sent a presentation to share. So they had some outside voices. And then another one I noticed was the support strategy, or support strategy development. This is a way to allow students to kind of pick how they might walk through this project and give various strategies, but really leave it up to the student. So if you really like the way Sway works and your first thing is collect graphics and images, you can do that. If you want to kind of think about it as an outline and get it on a document and tell the story with words first, you can do that. So he had options built in there, and then he gave feedback on those options. Again, a little bit of work in the design process, and with a small class, he was able to do that. So those are our case studies, and again, you can dig down into the actual checkpoints on your organizer.